He went to great lengths to access my daughter.
It was a terribly cruel thing you did.
It sent a shudder through my body.
The suffering is immeasurable.
Listen to this mother's memory.
He puffed up, got aggressive, and stormed through the house and grabbed his bag. Carly was crying, saying, please sort things out with Brandon's dad. I really care about Brandon, Mum, please, please. She was pleading with me and crying.
What if I told you nothing is as it seemed? There was no dad and no Brandon. Carly had fallen into a horrible trap that no one was prepared for.
So when you're a normal person interacting with normal people, your mind doesn't go to a place where you would even consider somebody being, so manipulative and so cruel.
When 14-year-old Carly Ryan fell in love, she was convinced she was talking to a teenage boy who shared all her interests. 18 months later, she found out that it was a man posing as his father, but it was too late. The day Carly discovered his identity was the day she died.
How would anybody cope hearing that?
I have to warn you guys, today's case is a really sad one, and it can get truly upsetting. But it's also a lesson to all of you who like making online friends. So if you're ready, let's dive in. Our story begins in Stirling, Australia. It's a tiny town, about 15 kilometers away from Adelaide, known for its beautiful scenery and peaceful streets. In fact, it's one of those towns where nothing bad ever happens. At least, that's how it was back in 2006. Stirling was the home of Carly Ryan. She was born on January 26, 1992, and she was raised by her mother, Sonia. Sonia was a really determined single mom. She had Carly when she was 20, and she worked her whole adult life to give her daughter the best life that she could. And for a while, it seemed like she really did. Sonia was Carly's best friend, and whenever Carly needed advice, she would go to her mom. At one point, Sonia also had a baby boy, and now they were a happy family of 3. Carly grew up into a warm, all-around good person.
Carly was amazing, compassionate, very loving, very sensitive, just a little sweetheart. When she'd walk in the room, she used to just light up the room and people gravitated towards her.
In 2006, Carly was 14. She was into fashion and emo culture, and she would also start experimenting with new friends and new kinds of adventures. That year, Carly's new friends introduced her to heavy partying, and she ended up in the hospital with alcohol poisoning. But once she was out, Carly knew better than to return to that group, so she distanced herself from them pretty quickly. But being the teenager that she was, Carly wanted new friends. So she took to MySpace and Vampire Freaks. Back in 2006, MySpace was a huge sensation. It was pretty much the mother of social media, and virtually every teen with a connection to the internet had a MySpace account. At one point, MySpace was the most visited website in the world. For Carly, as with many others, this was a great way to make friends. After all, you could meet so many more people online than you would meet at a small town school. This is how Carly befriended 17-year-old Brandon Kane, who went by the username Corrupt Koala on MySpace. She thought this was the beginning of a beautiful love story, her very first. In fact, it was the beginning of the end for poor Carly. At first glance, Brandon was the perfect match for Carly. They listened to the same music, and it seemed like they had a lot of common interests. He was a Texan-born guitarist living in Melbourne with his adoptive father, Shane. Both he and Carly were aspiring rock musicians, and they would chat for hours. Soon enough, Sonia saw her daughter light up whenever she was online.
She said, oh, Mum, I've met this really nice guy on the internet and he's friends with all my friends and he loves all the music I love and he loves the things that I'm into and he gives me advice and this is sort of how it all began.
Indeed, one of the things Carly loved most about Brandon was how he always had a wise thing to say about her day-to-day issues. After all, he was 3 or 4 years older than her, so he had an ounce of wisdom, or at least experience, to share. Sonia was slightly concerned about the age gap between them. Like many moms, she would peek at her daughter's screen for a second or two when she would chat with Brandon, but she didn't see anything unusual. However, back in 2006, people weren't really aware of online predators.
Looking back now, we were really quite naive about online security, and there was really nothing available at that time in 2005, 2006 on online safety. Her and her friends were doing their homework and presentations and Googling around to find information for their assignments and things. So it was just a part of life, and that's pretty much as far as it went.
As far as Sonia was concerned, Carly was living her very first love story, and she was happy for her. It's nice to be 14, worry-free, and meet a boy who shares all your interests. And there was something else that appealed to Carly about this relationship. Brandon's dad, Shane, had a MySpace profile too, and he would comment on some of the young couple's posts. It was nothing more than a seal of approval from him, but this meant a lot for Carly. You see, Carly never had a father, and she often felt sad because of it. Sonia was her best friend, but this doesn't mean that she didn't feel that a parent was missing. So when Shane came along, even just as an online presence, Carly felt like she also had an adoptive dad, just like her newfound lover. In January 2007, things were really heating up between Carly and Brandon. Carly was making arrangements for her 15th birthday, and she really wanted to meet Brandon. He was in the same country, right? What was stopping him from visiting her? Brandon's messages were pretty odd at times. Whenever Carly would ask him to come over, he would get pretty defensive. On the other hand, he would tell her how he loved her with all his heart. It's often these hot and cold romantic situations that are the hardest to leave. You get a glimpse of something nice, and when it sours up, you're just waiting for the sweet side to return. It's pretty toxic, and it usually does more harm than good. But in Brandon's case, toxic is an understatement. What he would do to Carly is unspeakable. So in January 2007, Carly made Brandon an official invitation to come to Adelaide for her 15th birthday party. But just as usual, Brandon said he couldn't make it. This time, he made it look as if he really wanted to come and was going to, but his mom put an end to his plans. Carly was pretty devastated. She really had her hopes up this time. She told Brandon how upset she was, and she told Sonia too. That's when Shane intervened. He called Sonia to introduce himself, and he said he would be coming to Adelaide with work soon. He worked in construction, he said, and he would love to meet the mom of the girl Brandon was so in love with. He seemed nice. Both he and Sonia were happy to see their children in love, so why not meet for a quick coffee in town?
The next thing you know, this man turns up in our main street of our town because I didn't want to meet him at our home yet. And I asked him for identification. When we met, he gave me a security card license.
Sonia could rest assured, this really was Shane, Brandon's dad. They exchanged phone numbers and agreed to stay in contact since Shane would come to Adelaide every so often with his construction company. On January 26th, Carly had her much-awaited birthday party. Sonia had invited Shane to the house too. His son couldn't be there, but what was wrong with the dad dropping by and bringing a present? So that day, Shane knocked on Sonia's door and entered the house with a smile. But his smile wasn't as wide as Carly's, as she would finally get one step closer to the love of her life through his dad. Shane gave Carly a present from Brandon and wished her a happy birthday. Later that evening, Carly opened up her present, only to find daring lingerie and a nurse's outfit inside. Sonia didn't see this, but there was something else that she saw towards the end of Carly's party.
He didn't sit right next to her. He didn't do anything out of the ordinary while he was around for her birthday, bought her gifts. And then over a little more time, I caught him look at her up and down in a really creepy way. And it sent a shudder through my body. And I had a mother's instinct that was like, oh God.
Sonia could have kicked Shane out of her house right then and there, and part of her wanted to, but she was kind and a polite person who liked to give the benefit of the doubt. So that night when Shane said he'd go to a hotel, Sonia invited him to spend the night in the guest room. But the next morning, Sonia found him sleeping in Carly's bed, surrounded by all of Carly's underage friends. And trust me, it gets worse. Much worse. That morning, Sonia did kick him out of the house, and Shane left in a nasty way.
He puffed up, got aggressive, and stormed through the house and grabbed his bag. Carly was crying, saying, please sort things out with Brandon's dad. I really care about Brandon, Mum, please, please. She was pleading with me and crying.
Then she had a serious talk with Carly. There was something truly off about Shane, perhaps about Brandon too, and she urged Carly to be extra careful.
And I said to her, Carly, something is not right about this connection. Something doesn't feel right, and she got it, because at that moment she sat down at the kitchen table and she looked at me and she said, okay, Mum.
Sonia gave Carly a strict rule: zero communication with Shane. She also sent Shane an email saying she would contact the police if she noticed any sort of communication between him and her daughter. You'd be excused for thinking Shane replied okay, or maybe didn't reply at all. Nope, these are some of the things he would write back to Sonia. What kind of person responds to a police threat with more threats? He'd been caught in a very clearly inappropriate situation, yet he was the one calling Sonia names and threatening her with lawyers. He also threatened her that Carly would move in with him and Brandon. He ended his email with, "You lose." On February 19th, 2007, Carly and Sonia woke up, had breakfast, and painted their nails together. Carly was getting ready for a sleepover with her friends, and she would spend the whole day with her mom before she left.
Carly told me she was going to meet her friends in the city, which she always did. They'd jump on the bus together in the hills and go down to the city and hang out. And at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, she left. She gave me a huge big hug at the door. In fact, she gave me about 4 hugs. And as she skipped off the veranda, she said, "Love you, Mum."
We will never know if Carly was overly emotional with her mom because she was feeling guilty about lying to her, or if she knew this might be the last time she saw her.
How lucky am I that it wasn't an argument, or, that I was telling her off about something. 4 hugs and a skip off the veranda, "Love you, Mum." Little did I know that would be the last words that I'd hear from my daughter.
The next morning, South Australia police received a distressing call. Someone had found the body of a young woman floating in the shallow waters of Horseshoe Bay, some 80 kilometers away from Adelaide. Meanwhile, Sonia was calling Carly over and over again. It was very unlike Carly to not pick up or write back. She was 15, and her phone was basically her life, especially since she'd been talking to Brandon. Just before 10 a.m., a man called Sonia. He'd found Carly's bag on the side of the road and was trying to return it to its owner. It was a kind gesture, but Sonia's heart sank. What was Carly's purse doing 80 kilometers away from home? And why wasn't the purse with Carly in the first place? That's when Sonia called the parents of the girl who was hosting the sleepover. Her blood froze when she found out Carly had never made it to the sleepover. Immediately, Sonia rang the police. When the officer heard her description of Carly, they sighed. They'd just found a body matching that description. Sonia had to drive all the way to Horseshoe Bay to identify the body, all the while praying it was all a big mix-up. It wasn't.
She was raped, bashed, and put into the ocean.
Sonia recognized her as soon as she saw her nail polish. Then she couldn't look anymore. But the police officers had to. It was their urgent job to piece together the crime scene clues and catch the killer ASAP. First, they could see that Carly struggled to fight off the attacker. Her jewelry was broken and scattered through the sand. Then, there was a tip of a latex glove close to her body. Whoever had killed her had come prepared for it. This was a premeditated murder. But little did the police know, it had been premeditated for a whole 18 months. Carly had 19 injuries on her body, half of those being blows to the head. She died from those as well as asphyxiation and drowning. Now the investigators had to track Carly's movements the day before the murder, so they checked the CCTV footage from all the surrounding shops and cafes in Horseshoe Bay. At 7:04 p.m. on February 19th, Carly was seen walking down the streets with 2 men. Just before 10 p.m., a witness corroborated the story. Carly was walking towards the beach with the same 2 men. Around the same time, he saw a pale blue car with a security badge reading 24 on it. Before they tracked down the car, the police also went through Carly's phone records. It didn't take long to notice Brandon. He was practically the only reason Carly was using her phone. It's pretty heartbreaking to see Carly's post from January 29th, 2007. To think it was this amazing boy that brought her death. Now, unlike poor Carly or Sonia, the police were aware of online safety and online predators, even if this was the toughest case they were dealing with. So when the investigators read Brandon's messages to Carly, they could tell he was being extremely manipulative. Brandon had started out as a kind, sweet boy with lots of interest in Carly as a person. As months passed, his messages got more aggressive, less forgiving, and very, very possessive. He was slowly isolating Carly from her other friends. And he wasn't just trash-talking them with her. He was doing it the other way around too. Brandon had several message exchanges with Carly's friends, and he was making sure they wouldn't speak to her as much. This is something manipulative, psychopathic partners can do. Isolate the victim so that the only person they can rely on is them. This way, they can gain full control of their partner. Sheesh. When the police spoke to Sonia about Carly's relationship with Brandon, Shane's name came up. Sonia told them about the very inappropriate incident, and she showed them the horrifying email exchange between them. It was now clear that Brandon and Shane were persons of interest in Carly's murder. So the detectives tracked down 2 phone numbers that Carly spoke to frequently, as well as on February 19th. One number was located in Adelaide, and the other was traced on the road from Melbourne to Adelaide from the day of her murder. But the names and addresses assigned to these numbers were fake, just like the ID and security card Shane had given Sonia.
When we met, he gave me a security card license, and it was all fake. It was just all fake information. He even wore a security shirt with a fake embroidered patch on it.
Wow.
He went to great lengths to access my daughter.
But the police would soon get a hit. Some of Carly's calls were traced to a tiny suburb called Walkerville. Walkerville is only a few miles away from Sonia and Carly's home, and it's home to a caravan park that the police decided to check. Soon enough, they obtained a witness account describing the same 2 men that were seen on the CCTV footage walking alongside Carly. They had stayed at the park just a day or 2 before, and they drove the same car that the other witnesses had identified on the beach. The car was registered to an address in Melbourne, and before the end of the day, the officers arrived at the house. In front of it was the pale blue car with the 24 security card. This was the home of 48-year-old Gary Francis Newman. Indeed, his name wasn't Shane, and he wasn't the father of Brandon. He was a father of 3, though. His children didn't know that he had over 200 fake online accounts, targeting underage girls and luring them to terrifying situations. Newman was immediately arrested and taken to the station, but several officers stayed back and investigated his home. Inside his desk drawers, they found hundreds of pages where he'd written hundreds of fake names, usernames, and passwords to all his fake social media accounts. Brandon and Shane were just 2 of his many online personas. When the police barged in on Newman, he was literally online chatting to several teenage girls. One of the tabs was his Brandon Kane MySpace page. He was a prolific catfish and online predator, using the names and pictures of real people, including those in his family, to attract innocent girls. But when he was talking to Carly, her mom even saw a picture of a boy typing.
When I looked over her shoulder, I saw a looped vision of a boy typing. Little did I know that it was looped vision at the time.
The detectives had caught Newman with his pants down, so to say. His fake accounts, including Brandon, were proudly displayed on his computer screen, and close by was Carly's camera, which he'd stolen during her birthday party. On the camera was a photo of Carly and Gary Newman together at her home. In a very creepy twist, as if there weren't enough already, the younger man seen on CCTV footage with Carly was Newman's real 17-year-old son. The police believe that Newman had hired his son to play Brandon for the day. Whether this was happening for the first time or his son was an accomplice in several of his horrible schemes, we might never know. On February 19th, 2007, Brandon finally offered to meet Carly face-to-face. Apparently, Shane would drive him to Adelaide for a day. The 2 could spend some time together on a romantic beach somewhere. When Carly met up with the 2, Shane didn't really leave them alone. In fact, they spent some time together in town. Around 10 p.m., Shane and Brandon drove Carly to the beach, where he professed his horrible obsession for her. When she pulled back, he killed her and threw her in the ocean. Incredibly, Newman's son watched the whole ordeal. He might have even participated in Carly's murder, but the police have yet to prove that. Carly's death was a shock to the whole world. People weren't that aware of online predators, and for Australia, this was the very first case of a catfish-related murder. Anyone who was watching the news at the time was desperate to know who could have done such a vile thing to a sweet girl who was kind to everyone. Who was the person behind this attack? And what was the story behind their twisted love story? But the Australian police kept it a secret for a long time. In October 2009, Newman and his son finally appeared in court, but their identities remained a secret. Newman's son pleaded not guilty, and Newman wanted to plead guilty to manslaughter, but the prosecution wouldn't have it. Remember the glove tip on the beach and the thousands of messages that Newman had sent Carly over a period of 18 months? Yeah. Her murder was premeditated, and Newman couldn't get out of this. During his trial, he tried the insanity defense. He complained that he had struggled with OCD and bipolar disorder his whole life. Moreover, he said he was asexual, so why would he be a sexual predator with a teenage girl if he didn't like it at all? According to him, he was simply a father figure to Carly, and he had only chatted with her through Shane's page, never Brandon. If you can believe it, he pinned the blame on his son. He said that it was his son that created the fake Brandon page and who manipulated Carly for a year and a half. So he would throw his own son under the bus if it meant earning a lighter sentence. Like it wasn't clear enough that Gary Newman is a monster. When the police checked the validity of Newman's claims, they discovered that his son did indeed have access to the Brandon account. So it wasn't his, but he was a pretty clear accomplice to his vile dad. Newman's story continued as follows. He, Carly, and his son went to the beach that evening. Then he offered Carly a ride home, but she refused. So they said goodbye and parted ways. What happened to Carly afterward was not his fault, as he wasn't there at the time. Why would Carly refuse a ride 80 kilometers away from home? Then it was time for Newman's son's trial. He testified against his father and gave a full account of what happened that night on the beach. He confirmed that Newman made creepy advances to Carly, and when she refused, he attacked her from behind. Newman's son insisted that he did not participate in the attack, only in the cover-up that followed. They were hoping that by throwing Carly's body into the ocean, it would look like an accidental drowning. However, they didn't think a forensic team would easily notice the many injuries on her body. It took the jury 2 whole days to reach a verdict, and people were afraid that Newman would walk free. This was the first case of its kind, and the law wasn't prepared to deal with it. However, the verdict was clear. Newman was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Newman's son was cleared of all charges, and the judges urged him to get his act together and distance himself from his father. As about Gary Newman, he said,
Gary Newman deserves a life behind bars for his grossly perverted plan to deceive, seduce, and murder Carly. It was a terribly cruel thing you did to this beautiful, impressionable 15-year-old child.
Instead of showing remorse, or at least looking sad, Newman said nothing, and in the months that followed, he appealed his verdict several times. They were all denied, though. Gary Newman has a lifetime to think about his actions, or at least a lifetime away from hurting more innocent people. It's hard to imagine what Sonia went through in 2007.
How did you cope hearing that?
Didn't.
Hey.
How would anybody cope? Hearing that? How would anybody watching cope with hearing that? The suffering is immeasurable.
But Sonia decided to turn this experience into something meaningful that can help other girls like Carly. She developed an app called Threat. It's specifically intended for young people who get stuck in dangerous situations. If you have Threat, you can press one button and your phone will send your location to all your emergency contacts.
I thought about
something that Carly may have been able to use to let me know that she was in trouble. She was trapped. She couldn't get any word out to anybody. He had taken her phone from her. In fact, he even sent a message to my phone saying, "Mum, I'm okay, everything's good."
In 2010, the Carly Ryan Foundation was also founded. It's all about online safety awareness.
Sonia Ryan's also giving talks at primary and secondary schools around Adelaide, but her cause could get the ultimate boost. The foundation's approached Oprah Winfrey in the hope she might agree to publicise it when she visits in December.
In 2017, as a result of Sonia's efforts, Carly's law was also set into place. This means that anyone caught lying about their age online to minors can be prosecuted. This is vital, as most online predators start by posing as much younger kids, peers of those they prey upon. It's amazing to see how a grieving mother turned tragedy into a powerful movement that can help thousands of innocent teens caught in the dark corners of the internet. It's just sad that Carly had to die for it. Thanks for watching, you guys. Hey, don't be shy, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more. See you next time, and as always, stay safe.